Hello and welcome to Transforming Worlds. In this episode, we speak to David Bassuk. David is a professor of theatre, transmedia, immersive narrative, and experience design with a focus on game design and spatial storytelling. He works both in live and virtual environments and explores meaningful interactions between designers and participants, blending technology with performances and theme parks. Bassuk works across academia and creative industries, collaborating with interaction designers and technologists on projects that emphasize narrative, affective dramaturgy, and audience engagement. His work spans entertainment venues, heritage sites, and multidisciplinary approaches to storytelling. He is experimenting with AI and is really at the boundaries of immersive experiences and spatial narratives. It's been an amazing episode in which we talk about theatre, audiences, experiences, and even get to that deeper level of what it means to be in this creative space, allowing it to unfold in organic ways. Tune in. So welcome, David Bassuk, to Transforming Worlds. We're excited to have you here. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Excited to join you and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So tell us, for our listeners, about your work and what is transforming for you these days.
What is transforming for me these days? Okay, yeah. So, sort of backstory, good dramatist. I come from theater, so we like to begin with the backstory. The backstory is I was interested in writing and literature as a young man, and that moved into working in theater and performance. I became adept and excited about working with actors and interpreting scripts and ultimately bringing them into three dimensions, moving in stage and staging. And staging the play became a focus as I was more interested in what is nonverbal in the very verbal medium of theater. So it drew me to the kind of scripts and the kind of stories that were um, much more spatial than literary. And then I began to work with movement, and I studied with Jacques Lecoq, and I began to think about gesture, and I began to think about space. So that was the sort of backstory. And then in a career of running theaters and directing plays and running conservatories of theater in acting, directing, filmmaking, and screenwriting, I became interested in the ways that the storytelling and the narrative was beginning to leave the mediums that were fixed and front facing. So I became interested in transmedia storytelling, immersive narratives. I became interested in nonlinearity and the multiple different shapes of stories beyond the sort of beginning, middle, end narratives. I got interested in and participated in creating works that were media entangled, where the media projections and the radio frequency IDs and the movements of performers and audience members became part of a space. And my preamble or my prologue in working with theater space meant that I had a vocabulary and a grammar for thinking about what was potentially experiences for audience in spaces, using technology, using XR. And now I'm beginning to work with using AI as a means of interacting with. So the adoption of the technology wasn't the purpose, the pursuit of experiences that were um, filled with meaning was important. And I began to recognize also that storytelling, which is a medium that largely where there is a teller or a griot or a singer of songs, um, is a form of storytelling that requires language. And I also began to see that games were another form of language that required another form of symbolic understanding. So the symbolism of language, the symbolism of mathematics inherent in games, um, there was always a space that I always thought was the offstage room. The interesting thing is the space between moments in a play, the space between actors physically on a stage, the space between people and places and cities, the place in a game where people are trying to determine the location and the level and the participation of the other players or the hidden treasures. The space between became to be a very vital thing because it was like the dark matter of storytelling. So storytelling didn't seem right anymore as a word. So I began to shift to thinking about spatial narrative, where spaces are actually generating opportunities for engagement in content and values and missions and ideas that were lived rather than told. So that's been the thing that's got moved me to where I am now. And so, I embrace pretty much all technologies, but I see them in the context of human beings trying to share their life experience and generate new experiences. So, time is uh, the field of play, but space is the activity. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
so, I think your second part of your question is what excites me now. Um, the dissolving of the hierarchies of old of the dominant mediums. Um, it's a weaning away or a tearing away at existing structures like cinema, like theater, like front-facing or very narrative games. It's the dissolving of the medium is the message. Marshall McLuhan, we say farewell to you now because the medium is not the message. The medium is merely the, the shuttle, which takes us to other mediums and enables us to go together on a journey into the imagination of the designer, narrative, the narrative designer, the creative designer, and more importantly, the social experience that we have with each other. So the idea that we are in a period of dissolving of an old and the beginning of a new is very, very transformative. And I feel it and I hear it in everything regarding storytelling, literature, film, XR. It's all shifting right now.
Wow. And you're in the middle of all of that. There's so much to unpack in what you've said. So, in for our listeners also, in theater, we talk about the fourth wall. And the fourth wall is the audience. So if you're standing on
Hmm.
stage, there are the coulisses on the side and the backstage behind you, and in front of you
Hmm.
is your audience, is
Hmm.
your public. And it
Hmm.
seems to me, this is obviously something that you know, David, but just to give context to my question. So
Hmm.
it seems that as you're talking about space and narrative, that first of all, the first wall as the first is the first form to go. It just collapses because it requires an active, visceral, experiential participation of the audience. Otherwise, you can't be part of the spatial narrative. And it requires a letting go from a performance point of view because the story unfolds with a certain level of uncertainty and unpredictability. How do you merge all of these things plus the new technologies in the work that you do every day?
Well, if we think about any existing medium and the history of that medium, there's always been experimentation within those mediums. There have been people who have done plays with the audience sitting in a circle around the show, arena theater. There have been productions that happened in the Baroque era in spaces. The great Max Reinhardt in Austria was experimenting with immersive theater as audiences experienced his plays moving about through his home that he had designed to do Midsummer Night's Dream and Moliere plays. People didn't know what was an actor, what was a participant, and the blurring of lines between those realities meant for a event that Was that a play? Was that an event? Had we crossed a boundary? Did we not care? And ultimately, I think when you blur the boundaries of mediums or you merge mediums, just like we are so familiar, especially in the late 20th century, with merging genres, if you
Mhm.
merge mediums and blur the edges, if you make the movement more liquid, then I think we begin to discover that it's not how, but it's what. And the what is what we want to, give to our audience slash participants. It's also what the audience wants of the experience. And it becomes a dialogue, um, which is not good for philosophy. Philosophy has other forms, right? I mean, we have a lot of plays that are essentially philosophical treatises that you might prefer to read in the 21st century. There are a lot of plays which, frankly, could be a podcast without any loss of value to the audience member. We're doing things in mediums that we're not thinking about why we're using a medium because people are so rooted in their medium. Like a person in theater says, I'm in theater. Well, does that mean you'd never work on a radio? No, I'd work in radio. So we're constantly defining ourselves by the mediums rather than our imaginations, our intentions, the building of an audience, a community, the desire to create uh, co-creation with extending an audience, whether it's on a stage, whether it's in XR, whether it's in Web3, whether it's in an immersive AI designed, hall of mirrors. We have lots of things we can be doing if we stop. We don't not just have to stop defining ourselves by the single mediums that we began in. We actually have to embrace the innovation and exploration and experimentation of what it is to move uh, our projects, not just amongst mediums, but amongst different ways for audiences to interact, like storytelling versus story living. That's just a simple binary. Story living and storytelling can coexist. It depends on the creativity, imagination, and effectiveness of the design.
It seems to me that there's like a continuum between the singular, individual, embodied experience, which has to be, even if theater were a podcast, the actor is
Right,
undergoing an experience. You always are. But
right.
it's just like it's lost to everyone else in a way. And because we can't see on the outside what the person is experiencing and embodying on the inside. And it seems
Mm,
that what this space opens is the multiplicity and the plurality of these experiences that then kind of build momentum for new things to unfold. And now,
right.
with the addition of AI, again, we have something intervening in this exchange that
Hmm.
is playing a part, but is not always explicit in the reflection and the integration of what it is that we learn and discover. How does that show up in your work?
Well, I started working, experimenting on an immersive project that uses AI as a sort of interlocutor, moderator within a LARP experience set within an immersive performance space. Um, it's a LARP in that people are not themselves; they have the alibi of a role that they're playing. Um, it's also very much focused on the like a LARP, the human to human interactions. Um, but because the spatial narrative, now has a reflective ability to remember and predict what audiences or participants might do, um, it changes the space. I mean, in LARPs, the setting where it happens, I've done an amazing projects with um, participating in the Chaos League from Italy, this amazing LARP company. Um, the choice of where it happens in a LARP is, to me, I think, and to many, very critical. The alibi of who you are, very critical. Well, if the space is a historical castle, say. You have the memory of, or the vibe of the castle, maybe the history, and maybe it's site specific, not just site sensitive. Maybe there's something to I'm in a castle. It changes who you are already. And then if you get a character or a costume, even more so. Well, what if instead of a castle, it was uh, an experience that not only customized, but provoked the character you were playing? A space that could understand your temperature, a space that could read your facial reactions. You would need to speak. The AI would potentially be able to read your behavior, see how where you are in the room. So the questions that I had the beginning of my career in staging, well, what if sitting versus standing, head tilted, head not tilted, these were all data points that could be fed into a reaction by the artificial intelligence in such a way as to give you information about your behavior real time, and then take you with the design of obviously myself and the creators on a journey that is narrative, but also very highly spatial, but also interactive. The other players are key. The themes of the piece are key. They just, where people come out the other side shouldn't be random. It shouldn't be like you dropped in the side of a highway in New Jersey somewhere. It's like you should be um, elevated, liberated, prepared for the next medium to synthesize that experience. So I never think that anything is good on in one medium alone. So this project needs um, a journey to, like the rumors that lead you to this. The, then there's the what happens in the immersive space. Then there's what happens afterwards. And that line of design for the audience and the audience to each other is unlimited. It's limitless. So that the potential for stories that run alongside your life that you can come back to, like we had come back to favorite novels or favorite films, to see how we are now with those. Similarly, that could be part of a new way of creating.
That's fabulous. It's really fascinating, and I see so many parallels with the
Mm.
societal times we live in, right? Where sometimes some of
Hmm.
those narratives are dead ends. You get stuck, and it's like, what now?
Right.
And how do you, to use a gaming analogy, which you already brought in, how do you jump into a parallel timeline and or to a parallel universe or a parallel world where you will learn new things about you that will give you the adaptive capacity to feel unstuck? And that is
Right.
a massive value. But I'm sure on your way there, you failed fabulously several times. What were
Yeah,
those failures?
I'm still.
Yeah, you have to, right? Otherwise, how do we create anything of value? But how do you reframe those failures as you go along to keep learning from them? So if you care to share a few examples of things that failed and how you dealt with those.
The fail continues to be designing narratives that are not dystopian or utopian, but are somewhere potentially where humans could make better choices. It's difficult because storytelling tends to want a villain. Um, and this may be Western storytelling. Storytelling tends to want a certain structure of point, counterpoint, uh, uh, protagonist, succeeds until they fail, fails until they succeed. This is
Yeah,
a
the status
different, this is,
changes.
yeah, the status changes. In a spatial narrative, it doesn't work on time. It doesn't work on beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't work on causality. It works on something more potentially spiritual, potentially more, um, uh, you know, that deals with infinity in ways that humans have real trouble. trying to sort of understand. Um, um, what is that great line from Kafka? I used it in a play. I did a production in Philadelphia of Kafka's Smile, which was short pieces from Kafka's lesser known works. And one of them was from the Blue Notebooks, where Kafka says in a scribble, the infinity is not the temporary at standstill. And it's always been an amazing quote to me, because when things are fixed or stuck or you're bored, it doesn't mean that that's infinity. Infinity is something beyond that.
Yeah,
And
beautiful. I heard something, I think yesterday or the day before, from a spiritual context, and I don't know who said
Mhm,
it, so I cannot attribute, but it still sort of really stuck with me. And
mhm,
it said, we humans are the everything that can be anything. And
mhm,
it goes to the same concept of the organic unfolding of the infinity, which for us is so
mhm.
mystical and so it's also for many people something to be feared instead of something to inspire or feel awe about or for. It
Yeah.
it's very destabilizing because
Mhm,
we like our anticipatory capacity, we like predictability. I mean, even in my work, when I do public speaking and someone in the audience then says, can you come speak to my team, my people, etc., they ask me to tell the very same thing.
mhm.
They'd like to hear it again. And I'm like, and I understand the human need of that, but necessarily when I tell it in a different context, it is going to
Right,
be different. Even if I were to say
right,
the same words, the subjectivity is always
right,
there. And we're so afraid of that subjectivity that we have and that unpredictably, the fact that within ourselves we are unpredictable. I think that that leads to a lot of these presumed
mhm,
failures, which are just lessons in disguise,
right,
because that's not there. But at the same time, there is a question that is almost moral in like how do we use these different mediums for good, and for
right,
good means opening up to that one sense of wonder instead of replicating the form. So when we talk
right,
about transformation, the word, the etymology says it already, it's a cross structure, form. So you have to transcend it and go beyond it in order to generate a new form, which is still going to be a form. But then it's
right.
less about, hey, here's the hero's journey. Here are your story arches. Here is the way
Mm,
we've always done it, and now we're just putting it into a different sort of decor, and really trying to say, how do we go beyond that? But that does need the people around you and the audience to co-invest. And that's a very
right.
capitalistic term, but they have to co-invest at the very least time and hopefully some money. How do you get them to engage? How does one do that?
Well, you said it just now, really. It's not how do you get them to participate and co-create, and you have to sort of get a co-investing, or as we often say, a buy-in, right? But I think the design for that is critical. And um, before I answer the question, I want to just note how little this happens in traditional arts. You
Yeah.
buy a ticket, you move to your seat. Maybe an orchestra, maybe not. There's a curtain that goes up, or it's just an open stage. We just begin, and when it's over, get out. So
And
we're not
literally,
actually.
the verb for that is to consume, which is the same verb as to go up in flames and disappear forever. So we need to change that. It's necessary that we change that, because there is a much greater efficiency, for lack of a better word, when instead of consuming, we use these experiences to learn and multiply the lessons and multiply the opportunities. But it's very hard to do because the effortfulness of creation and production needs to be accompanied by a level of inquiry and curiosity that if it's not reciprocated, then we end up in this consumption loop, which is what the question was about. Like, how do you get people to engage and buy in, to use your
Well,
words?
the first thing we need to understand is duration, part of experience design. How do you spend the time?
Yeah.
Do you spend the time to prepare, to build? First attention, then curiosity, then a level of confusion, then a level of interaction, potentially another layer of curiosity that leads them to participation. So it's a design process. It's not a narrative process. It's a design process that builds from attention into interaction. And then, if one has developed the interaction, now we can go next into immersion, next into co-creation. And then the immersion is not just complete at co-creation, they become a new creator from the spark, right? From the sunlight that we've enabled them to
Yeah, yeah.
participate in. So how this would be practically, um, let's say it's a theater production. Look, I learned this actually doing the Kafka play. I really wanted to do the play, and our board of directors said, we just can't afford the risk of doing a play by a writer in the dressing room. And I said, all right, well, let me try to do something. Um, I said, we won't schedule the play for a year. And over the course of the year, I'll show up with actors, with musicians, with dancers, with lecturers, talking about Kafka, creating collaboration, pop-ups each time, a lecture at a senior citizens home, a conversation about Kafka and the law, Kafka and Judaism, Kafka and the body, Kafka and this and Kafka and that for a year of symposiums and pop-ups. And by the time we were about to open the actual production, we had a very enthusiastic, very full, nearly sold out every night of audiences whose appetite had been whetted, whose we had respected enough to bring them something for free for them to come back to. Now, where we failed was when the show was over, we just went into production for the next show. Because we weren't going to be the Kafka Theater Company of Philadelphia, but in fact we dropped them. And so,
Right.
and it was the model of producing plays. The funders and the grant writers want to see you have a season of plays, not the building of a community. Because we could have taken the Kafka audience over into Vonnegut or Nadine Gordimer. We could have grown them and extended them. So what we failed to do, I understood when I began to understand transmedia about 6, 7 years later. But my insight about what we should have done is still absent from the majority of arts producing. It's because really what I failed to recognize was that having um, brought an audience together, my responsibility wasn't to my actors and my company, it was to my audience. And I missed that because I had never learned that. So now that's part of what I teach, because from that failure to understand building heartfelt with people who, frankly, when you're running a theater company, you're thinking about making sure you're
Yeah.
earning enough money to possibly make sure you have a show running. If especially if you're an edgy company, or so it's a different way of thinking. And let's say it's a filmmaker. So a filmmaker wants to do a film, and film even now is still more
Yeah.
expensive, and the time. Well, do a podcast, do a pop-up, there's so many things, so many mediums that one can do for free that, the costs are limited.
Yeah, it
And then you
definitely
could
speaks to my
build,
heart. You speak to my
yeah,
heart because that's what I do in the arena of transformation is try and do
mm,
it in different spaces. Going back to the
right,
spatial aspect,
sure.
in order to learn. Actually, this
Hmm.
podcast is born out of my need to be a speaker who listens,
Mm-hmm.
create that space for my own listening, because otherwise you go into your own echo chambers, right? Very much like in the theater production, you have to make sure that the show must go on. So you have to make sure it keeps running, and then you forget what you started doing it for the first place. So thanks for your candor in sharing that, because I think many of us experience that. Not all of us have the guts to say it out loud. And it's important because the experiences we're going through as humanity right now, and you touched upon the mystic aspect or the spiritual aspect in spirituality. The ongoing rhetoric is that time and space are collapsing, which is what is happening in your work as well, even if it is for that moment in which we choose to hold that together. That's very,
Mm-hmm.
very important that that happens, because only
Mm-hmm.
then can something different unfold. Now, you look to technology, and we see those metaphors clearly in what you're saying. Do you look to nature as well?
Of course. Yeah, and nature is always the great teacher, which gets to let me take that statement to the question of what world building is. I just taught a good, beautiful day in Eindhoven yesterday at the Design Academy in Eindhoven, um, and the master students in the program were really thrilling to be talking to. Um, I gave a short talk, and then I met with the group of them about each of their individual projects. Um, and the question of world building, first I used the term in my talk, but they really wanted to know what did that mean, world building? And world building in some ways is the sort of the noun for spatial narrative, right? Because it's the world. And, in the theater, I began to realize as I moved from being a writer to being a director that, you don't need to tell actors everything that they should be thinking or doing. In fact, that's the sign of a bad director. What a bad director should do is create an environment in the rehearsal room, design with the scenic designer, a ground plan that makes their natural movements useful to be recorded rather than telling them specifically where to go. So the designing of a space in the sense of a setting. But then the rest of the rehearsal, of course, is to refine the staging, but it's also to expand their appreciation of the world that this play takes place in. What's happening in the street? What kind of street is it? Where do people shop? The anthropological questions. What's the politics of the time? What are the dominant philosophies of the time? What is aging in this era? What is sexuality? What is gender? What is, and as they begin to expand that, their focus on the character begins to be refined by the influence that is not in the script, but there for the writer who writes the script.
Yes.
So that's my introduction to world building. But then, you look at nature, what do we do? Often we talk about nature in terms of how we use it, how we consume it, as if it wasn't itself alive. The same way colonialists used to think about indigenous people as they discovered them and thought of them as part of nature, therefore to be, that God gave them this place to exploit. So this colonization mentality that goes in the use is about nature being used, about animals being used, about people who are not us being tools. This thinking has to stop if we're going to build within ourselves a higher and deeper self. So the designers in Eindhoven, the young designers, the question always kept coming up is not only who are you doing this for, but who do you want them to be after it, and who are you to be thinking about this? Where is your skin in the game? Where is your uh, where have you prepared yourself with the validity to tackle this? And if you haven't, do that. Do that first. Look at the larger questions, not just who's been talking and thinking about this, but actually what are the needs? What's going on in the field? Be more of a researcher before you're a creator. Otherwise, you're likely to be some form of, you know, um, teller or
I take it even
colonialist. Yeah.
further. I'd say not only do it first, but do it during, do it together.
Yeah, 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 sure.
Because
I agree.
I wrote a book now 10 years ago that's called Change Ahead that talks about design and research as complementary capacities. And it goes exactly to that. But I think we, especially for us generationally, we have to let go of the idea that we have to be prepared in advance. You can't be. I mean, it's just
No, no, I
no
agree.
longer possible. So you have to be aware, you have to be in sync, you have to turn on the feeling, which is obviously with a background in theater is something, or for me with a background as a designer, is something that we turn to almost
Mm-hmm.
automatically, but it needs to be made explicit that feeling into that exploration is the key to exploring. It's not because otherwise we become Darwinian, right? We want to categorize everything, and this is this, and this is that, and so on. And as designers, we do have a bit of a bias towards that because we like processes, and but we have to let go of the process, and we have to tune up, really dial up that feeling into things so that others
Mm-hmm.
can feel with us. And then to your point about the creation of worlds, I'd like to refer to Nora Bateson's work, where Nora talks about transcontextuality. So who am I with all of those feelings when the context changes and when it changes again? And how can I bring that which I learned in one context back to the other and keep that conversation moving? And it's that fluidity you referred to in the beginning so much,
Yeah,
something that we start getting in motion and that we accept that becomes, to use a more artistic term, that becomes our muse, and that
yeah,
it's not no longer just driven by us, but it means we have to look at ourselves first. We have to be less dictatorial, to use a colonial word. I grew up in a former colony and I was born in a military dictatorship in Argentina. So for
mm,
me, when I see these structures of power, they become very caricaturesque. They become silly almost. It's like,
yeah,
that there's nothing. It's metallic. It's hard. There's nothing playful and plastic and fluid to it. So I just wanted to add that to what you said. But then you say, we bring this kind of now combination of our emotions, our feelings, our organic, us as compost, which future compost that we are,
right.
together with the, perhaps we bring our experiencing self, and the AI is helping us to keep track of the narrating self, to use the terminology of Daniel Kahneman.
Mm-hmm.
What is going to be the next thing? What's next with the inclusion of AI? Which questions are we going to have once we start bringing AI into our performance arts and our
Mm.
narratives?
Well, number one is we'll be better able to document what we've done. Um, Theater productions, for example, if one is using a multimodal AI like Gemini is promising to be, um, one can know the space, and you could teach staging, or you could create experiences where participants create um, things, uh, create dances, recreate social participation. Lots of things that XR plus AI could do to make people um, explore living inside of a memory, a cultural memory, perhaps a family memory. The ability to access firsthand, real time, now in the present, something from the past will be an extraordinary gift, especially for people getting older, especially for people trying to understand cultures that they are lost. Um, so that's one, and that will be a very important piece. The other part is that, um, you know, what's that saying? I think is it William Goldman who said the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. So AI has the capacity of bringing futurists and people who are thinking about you know, the dials that we are already turning. What happens when we get to a higher number on the dial? And to be able to predict that better, to be able to get people to participate in the thinking about, well, the consequences and the time frame of action or inaction will make a potentially more informed public, but it'll also make them an informed creative class. Because I think we have defaulted to the wonder of human imagination at the expense of data.
Mm.
And therefore, in a very insightful writer or storyteller or designer, or filmmaker, or dancer, we've had extraordinary what we've called genius because well, like Freud said about Da Vinci, he woke up in the middle of the night and found out that everyone was still asleep. We've had one Da Vinci. We've had some Da Vinci's we've never heard of, right? But for the most part, what Da Vinci was doing was adding data to his imagination, use his imagination to ask the questions, and then his research to test the imagination. That's not common in any shape. And it's not common in education. We talk about theory, but we're not talking about actually using prediction. And what's one of the things that we don't talk a lot about with AI is its predictive capacity, its way of actually putting together information and looking at potential consequences as they track. Those two things, being able to explore the past and being able to really investigate the future, will change us.
I hope they change us for the better.
AI has no agenda. I mean, and that's what Hollywood has not explained to us. I don't think we're going to end up with, you know, AIs that are have a mind of their own.
Oh, for
But
sure not. No, what I was
yeah, yeah.
referring to is I hope the changes for the better because of what we said about the pluriversality. So the idea that there are more ways of being in the world,
Yeah.
that there are more ways of looking and seeing and experiencing. And of course, it lowers significantly the risk of
Mm,
doing this. Because if I were now to say, hey, I'm going to color my hair, then it's going to take all that time to grow again to its natural color. So probably that's not something I want to do because the risk is too high. But if I can put upload my photo up somewhere and try different hair colors and styles, then I can learn much more quickly about the things that aren't
yeah.
really going to work for me anyway. So better stick to the authentic color and just be me. And I think that in this way, AI can potentially hold mirrors to us, sometimes black mirrors, to use a Netflix reference, but
Hmm.
sometimes very pure, very crystalline mirrors that help us see when we are more engaged with ourselves and in our true way of being, and when we are doing things that are potentially harmful, are potentially uninteresting, more of the same, and that we use these capacities to kind of really, it's like almost a telepathic experience, right? When we talk about spatial narrative, you can transport yourself into new spaces, into new ways of being. And this is so interesting for
Hmm.
humans because we can't be neurologically and psychologically, we cannot be two things at the same time. We cannot be at two spaces at the same time. We just cannot hold this concept. So I think this is going to be something that AI might help us see and realize and explore, losing a timidity, because it's, well,
Hmm.
there are these discussions, of course, that it is not very good for the environment, which is true. But we will learn to use it hopefully more wisely. That's where my hope sits. So if it were up to you
Hmm.
and we were able to fast forward, say, 20 or 50 years into the future, and people would be using
Hmm.
spatial narrative more and more and learning from it and developing it further, what might the world look like and how will it impact society?
Well, I don't know if this is, my subjective desire or my projected knowledge. It
Mm-hmm.
might be both or
Both.
neither. Um, I really, I would hope, I am hoping, they put in an active verb, right? Um, AI has told me that I write too passively, so I am hoping. um, I am hoping that an increase of empathy leads to a greater coherence on shared values, and that those shared values are not designed in a hierarchy that is vertical, but one that is more horizontal, and one that includes not only uh, humans, but also animals and also nature, that we actually begin to think outside of the optimism pessimism binary and focus more on the what I can do if I do it with others. Because what I can do if I do it with others is powerful. Optimism and pessimism both are stagnant.
Yeah.
They're a form of procrastination. And procrastination, we know, is a form of self-hatred. And in the self-hatred, that sounds very pejorative, but I think we have many traumas to overcome in our lives. And they show up when we don't act proactively, or we don't make the choices. And so between dystopia and utopia, which is the other piece that builds out of optimism and pessimism, another field is available of protopia, of what is the future we will can make with each other if we do the work, if we show up, if we listen, if we pay attention, and if we embrace what's called cathedral thinking, not just something that we'll see, but generations later we'll see. That we'll think more in time as well as we cohere with each other in essentially empathy. I don't think that AI or VR or any form of XR, um, even a writing tablet, these do not create empathy. What creates empathy is a decision to listen, hang out, be present, um, and
Mm-mm.
find the edges of your bias and find the edges of your ego, and uh, don't worry that you may not be, the tip of the spear. Just be part of the circle. And I think thinking in terms of um, how one spends one's time needs to be curated carefully, but also generously. Um, and I think one thing very practical that AI has helped me do is get away from to-do lists and think more in terms of sort of time boxing. Like, how am I spending my time, right? Rather than what am I checking off on this infinite list, you
Mm.
know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that AI has helped me do is indeed also edit. I'm, I
Oh,
think your
yeah.
use of language is so admirable. You've obviously thought about these things a lot, and you're a native speaker, but it's so beautiful how you word these very complex notions that we've been discussing. And
No,
with
thank you.
regards to the writing tablet, that for me is a massive space holder. I still write longhand as much as I can.
Yeah.
I really am grateful for my Remarkable because I then can take what I wrote longhand and immediately move it into, convert it to text that I can work on the computer and then give the AI to correct my grammar, which sometimes is, in the flow of the moment
Oh,
is
yeah.
unintelligible. So tell us, where can people find you and find your work?
I'm very available on LinkedIn to be sought out.
Yeah.
And on LinkedIn and Instagram, I also have a link tree that shows links to many different projects that I've worked
Okay.
on. There are certainly common themes, spatial narrative, immersive
Yeah.
design, uh, uh, understanding the relationship between the actor and the audience, um, but also the ways in which games create communities and lead to narratives that lead into social justice
Yeah.
activities. So it's there to me, inside of me, I don't,
It makes
with
perfect sense.
reserve, it makes perfect sense. So I'm going to
I
take
know
some
the feeling.
time. Yeah.
Is there something else you'd like to share with us to close?
Because, I don't know. I don't know if I have a perfect sentence or a perfect quote on it, but I woke up this morning after coming back from Eindhoven yesterday, and I met with about 20 students of Michael Kaethler's design class in Eindhoven. And they were just such a lovely group of people. Lovely because their attention was so strong.
Mm.
Um, our conversations were so profound, and they brought out in me a vulnerability that I think made the table we sat at just so memorable. Um, each of them had a different design project, very different. They were sort of like a table of, like what I do in multiple places. I was doing at this one table with these brilliant students in this brilliant school, and I just felt so. By the time I got on, left for the train, I was practically flying, and it remains to be the thing about being a professor or a teacher or an older person who's working is that you're not only giving but you're getting so much, and so much of what I got from them yesterday was like the power of trying. Each of them had like a purpose, and they were very diverse, but the power you could see in their faces that they were going to give it a try, and that's all one can ask, really. And that's, you spend a lot of time trying to get people to have the courage or the ambition, but when you see it already, you can go much further. And I just want to see more, certainly young people, especially because they have more years to try it,
Mm-hmm.
to try it
Mm-hmm.
out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The
that's my
future is
takeaway.
theirs, for sure.
Yeah, well, sure, but not unless they're ambitious, which is not to say
Of
egotistical.
course, they
We
need the
see, we,
ambition and they need us to stimulate that ambition and to sort of, create
yeah,
also, we're also space holders of that future in a way.
yeah,
But
yeah,
they're the ones that are gonna be there. And as you talked about cathedral thinking, the people
yeah,
after them as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful reflection. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for being with us, David. It's been a joy to
No,
listen to you and to learn from you too.
oh,
Thank you.
oh, thank you so much for the invitation. I love talking with you. So.